Hi, everyone. Welcome to our May Book Club Favorites event. This month, we're discussing The Secret Book of Flora Lee by New York Times bestselling author Patti Callahan Henry. Today, we're joined by the author herself. We are also joined by our marketing experts, Carlin and Dana, to help lead the conversation. Before we get started, I just want to let everyone watching know that 3 lucky viewers could win a galley of The Paris Daughter by Kristen Harmel. To enter for your chance to win, just leave a question for us in the comment section of this video, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible live on screen today. And now onto book club. Patti, thank you so much for joining us. Can you kick us off by telling us a little bit about this lovely novel?
I am so thrilled to be here. I've been looking forward to this for weeks, to be with the book club and to be with all 3 of you. All right, what it's about. Come with me. It is 1939, and we are headed to Bloomsbury, England, right outside of London, where we meet the Linden family. Hazel, who is 14 years old, and her little sister, Flora Lee, who is 5 years old. They are about to be sent to the country because an edict has just come down from the government. Operation Pied Piper. All children must be sent away from the cities to live in the country with strangers. Hazel and Flora Lee get lucky. They end up with the Aberdeen family in Binsey, right outside of Oxford, England. But although they're sent away and they're comfortable and in a charming village on the River Thames, they're still exiled from their family. So Hazel makes up a fairy tale world for her little sister. It is called Whisperwood and the River of Stars. In Whisperwood, these girls can be anything they please. An owl, a fox, a bird, a bunny. It is the place where they are safe, and it is a secret between just the 2 of them. A year goes by, and the unthinkable happens when Flora Lee disappears from the edge of the River Thames. She is lost. She is assumed drowned in the river, and she is not found. Hazel blames herself because she believes that Flora Lee went to look for Whisperwood and the River of Stars. 20 years goes by, and Hazel is working in an antiquarian bookshop when a book comes in through the back door. She unwraps the parchment paper. She unties the ribbon. She sees original illustrations by Pauline Baynes. She slides them aside to see a rare first edition of an American fairy tale called Whisperwood and the River of Stars. And that's what it's about.
Patti, that was incredible. I felt like I was at story time at a bookstore. I would like you to just keep going. I could listen to that for hours. But Carlin and I are going to kind of popcorn some questions to get us started. So in that beautiful pitch you just made, you introduced us to Hazel and Flora, the sisters that are the centerpiece of this story, and they create this magical world of Whisperwood. It's a story that they love. And I think to just get us started, is there a book or a story from your childhood that enthralled you in the same way?
There definitely was. So I was probably like all of us, because we're in the book business. I was a bookworm. I won't say nerd. I was a bookworm. And, I made sense of the world through story most of my life. And yes, I was obsessed with Narnia. I was obsessed with Alice's Rabbit Hole. If you've ever read Fantastes, there's a portal through which they fall in a desk to another world. So many of the stories that I loved allowed me in my imagination to enter another world. And I think an author often has only their own great loves and obsessions to work with. And yes, that was one of mine when I was a child.
I love just even how you speak about it. We already touched on that, but truly you are such an amazing storyteller, magical storyteller. And as you mentioned, yeah, you really, really are. And I'm sure everybody who's met with you on tour thus far has felt the same. You touched on, obviously, yes, all of our loves of story. And obviously within the Secret Book of Flora Lee, everyone truly loves a book about books. And even better, yes. Your novel centers around a bookstore. What in particular inspired you to write about that specific setting?
Well, it wasn't even the setting as much as the character. Almost everything grows out of the character. So Hazel, here she was, this imaginative, amazing young woman making up a fairy tale world for her sister so her sister would feel safe. And now she's an adult, and she believes that fairy tale, that her own imagination, her own storytelling made her sister disappear. And so I knew that she would cut herself off from that very vital and important part of herself. But what does she do instead? She works in a bookstore. She collects notebooks. She collects antique pens. She hangs out in London coffee shops where the writers hang out, Laguerre. She listens to them talk. She reads articles about writers. She attends auctions where they auction off writer paraphernalia, but never buys anything. So it's very much this idea of a shadow artist, meaning someone who won't allow them to do the thing they love, but surrounds themselves with the things that represent what they love. So her job at the antiquarian bookstore, and even the job she's about to go to at Sotheby's, is in the antiquarian book section. So all of her life has been built around this, but yet she won't allow herself to do it.
I love that. And I
love antique. I'm sorry, Dana.
No,
who doesn't love an antiquarian bookshop? I mean, and I visited one, I've visited many, but I interviewed an owner of one in London and got to hold these 600-year-old books and visit this antiquarian shop. And when you're in there, you're thinking, this is what I should make of my life. This is what I should do, because it's just it's endlessly fascinating.
I was going to completely agree with you. I think anytime you kind of step foot in a bookstore like that, it's just such a unique energy that you can kind of feel. And I think you can feel it in this book as well. Sisterhood is a massive piece of this story. I know you have a few sisters of your own. Did you take any inspiration from your own life and those relationships when you were writing about Hazel and Flora?
I am sure that I did. I'm the oldest of three, and my youngest sister is nearly 12 years younger than me. So she'll say 11, I'll say 12. So it's about, I'll say midway, 11 and a half. And even though I left when she was very young, that age gap makes you feel very responsible, very motherly, very protective. And although I wasn't thinking about any of that when I was writing the book, I believe that once again, just like the love of Narnia or Alice in Wonderland or any of the portal worlds we could enter as a child, I am sure that worked its way into it. And what would I do? And I think it also has grown a little bit out of being a grandmother. There's always this great fear that I didn't really have as a mom, that I had as a sister or a grandmother of losing a child, like losing track of. I've had bad dreams about it. So there's this fear when I'm fully responsible and I'm the parent. I didn't have that fear, but as a sister or an aunt or a grandma or a mama, which is what I am, I think there's always this, if it's my fault, if it's my fault.
That totally resonates.
I think I tapped into that. Yeah.
So research is so important when writing historical fiction. And we know, as you touched on, that your novel is based on Operation Pied Piper in real life. What kind of research did you do to write this book? And were there any pieces of history that you wanted more information on but couldn't find?
Wow, the research on Operation Pied Piper was fascinating. I think we all know about the time period when they sent children away to live in the country. I mean, that's where the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe comes from. Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy were from Operation Pied Piper. But I never knew the name. And when I found out the name, I had that thing, that chill that I ignore at my own creative peril. Like, wait a minute. I don't think that's a very good legend. And it's not. I have the original. It is a terrible legend about a piper who leads children off and they disappear forever and drown in the River Wyvern. Like, it's a terrible legend. And when I found that in the research, I thought, why would they name an operation to keep children safe after a German legend of disappeared and drowned children? And so that was the very first kernel of this story. I never did find out why they named it that, but the research was intense and really fascinating. And it mostly had to do with first-person accounts. I have loads of books that were written by men and women who are now obviously in their 80s and 90s, or some who are already gone, and first-person accounts. And that was the bulk of my research, aside from the setting and the time period. I interviewed an evacuee. I interviewed a 94-year-old evacuee. And gathering those stories, I was able to work its way into Hazel, FLORA LEA, and their friend Kelty, who was also exiled. And then even Harry, who was forced to billet, who is their best friend who they live with, they were forced to billet children or house children. Mm-hmm. So from both sides of the story, families who were forced to house and also children who were sent away from their families. So that was the bulk of the research for this book.
Amazing.
That's really incredible. And just while we're chatting, just a quick reminder to everyone, 3 lucky viewers were giving away galleys of The Paris Daughter by Kristen Harmel. So make sure you drop a question into the comment section and you'll be entered for a chance to win one of those. So just to skip a little bit ahead, Patti, you and I have talked about how synchronicities can sometimes happen when you're writing books. And I know, a question that I always love to hear authors answer is, did anything surprising happen to you while you were writing this book? And I know in some of our conversations, you have had some really remarkable coincidences happen. And I would love if you could just briefly touch on maybe 1 or 2 of the ones that really surprised you the most.
Absolutely. And let me say, I have read The Paris Daughter, and it is incredible. So you want to drop in a question, even if you don't want an answer from me, you want to win that book. So, oh, wow. I had so many things, Dana. It was one of the more magical experiences in writing a book, especially after I finished the rough draft and went to England for nearly a month. And I had things like I was touring Binsey, which is where our children end up. It is a small hamlet right outside of Oxford. And I had a tour guide who was showing me around. And we were walking down this long pathway towards this medieval church and the Treacle Well, which is actually the Treacle Well in Alice in Wonderland. It is a real well that is also in my novel and plays a pivotal role. And I was walking down the road and she pointed to the woodlands above. And she said, those woodlands were owned by a family. They're Wickford Wood Hills, and they will always be in a conservation because the family left it all to their daughter, Hazel. I know, head to toe chill bumps. When I went to interview,
you had no idea any of this. Yeah.
The book was completely finished except for weaving in the last portions and making sure and checking. And in fact, it was headed towards ARCs when I went on this trip, towards, for those of you who advance reader copies. This trip was to make sure I didn't get anything wrong and to try and add some really deeper layers to the story. So Hazel had already been named. So that was head to toe chill bumps. And when I told my tour guide, Tabby, that's the name of my character, and I was like, oh my God. She said, that's just how stories are. I was like, well, I have to agree. Also, if in the story, in the novel, the owners of the bookshop where she works, the owners are Edwin and Tim and Hazel have a really close relationship. And when I went to interview an unknown owner of an antiquarian bookshop in London, he stuck out his hand and introduced himself to me and said, hi, my name is Tim.
Oh my gosh.
So things like that just happened over and over. And I do believe that when we enter that creative realm and we're following the intuitions left and right, that we do get a ping here, move this way, move this way. And once in a while, we gotta, you're on track.
You were meant to tell this story. Absolutely. That's incredible. Patti, do you see yourself in or identify directly with any of the characters in your novel?
Oh, wow. I mean, all of them. I see myself, little pieces. I've never written about myself directly. I can't imagine writing a memoir or even a loosely based character about me. First of all, probably be mostly boring. But I think that in Hazel, it's the story loving part of her belief in the power of it. In Flora Lee, it's that innocence at 5 years old that you do believe that you are safe in your imaginary world. In Harry, it is the idea that these young girls have come into his house and he wants to find a way to tell them he cares about them. And the only way he can do it is with art. He draws these little sketches because at that age, we don't know how to express, you know, I care about you and I want to make sure you're safe. And I love Bridie, the mom who takes care of them. She is a little rebellious for the time period, and she is named after my granddaughter. Her name is Bridget. I think I see, you know, there's little, even in the bad parts of people, even in the hag, you know, we're multitudes, y'all. We are multitudes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to an audience question. There's some really wonderful ones to pick from. I am curious about this as well. Diane wants to know, was this always the title for the book, The Secret Book of Flora Lee?
No. So let me tell you that in the Pied Legend of the Pied Piper, what happens is the children drown in a river. And I knew that the youngest sister would disappear into a river. And that would be the assumption of where she had gone. So this novel, when I sold it to Atria, was The River Child. That was what I called it the whole time I was writing it. It was my bullseye. It was what I was aiming for. The epigraph of this novel in the front of the book is a snippet of a poem by Mary Oliver that says, said the river, imagine everything you can imagine and keep on going. And that was my mantra with this book. Imagine everything you can imagine, said the river, and keep on going. So yes, its original title was The River Child.
That's a great question. Let's do another audience question. This is from Stephanie. The book's end pages are beautiful, and I would love to hear about the inspiration behind them.
I have to agree.
Yeah, they're stunning.
I think we give it all thumbs up around the table. The end pages are astounding. They really are. When I first saw them, I gasped out loud. Same with the cover. We never did a second cover. That cover showed up in my inbox and I gasped, and that was that. We've tweaked it and on the hardcover, the river shimmers. But the end papers were my editor's idea. And originally the end papers were going to be a map. But when we decided on a landscape for the cover, we decided a map was redundant. So Atria, the astounding artists at the house designed the end papers. And I keep looking up because they're on my bulletin board right across the room so that I can see them. I printed them like this big and they're on my bulletin board because they're so beautiful. As our original illustrations y'all had made, and there's so many beautiful things, imagery that rises out of this novel that those make the book even more. You open it up and there they are, and you know you're entering a world that is halfway between worlds, right? A little bit of a liminal space between the seen and the unseen, the visible and the invisible. That's how I wanted the book to feel, and I feel like that's how the end papers feel.
I think that's a great connection to this next audience question from Jennifer. She says, I'm fascinated by illustrator Pauline Baynes. I have to agree with her. And she says, what kind of research did you do on her life? And to, add on to that, I would love to know also, like, is there a particular reason you chose her as the inspiration?
Oh, Jennifer, I love that you know who she is. So I can tell when I'm at events and when I do my longer opening spiel and saying she saw these original illustrations from Pauline Baynes, you can see the people who know who she is perk up. Pauline Baynes, you can Google her later for anyone who isn't Jennifer or me or Dana or Carlin, and see that she was the illustrator for all the Narnia series, for some of J.R.R. Tolkien's books. Also Watership Down. She has a very special edition. She was a British illustrator and an astounding one at that. When I was writing this novel, I printed some of her imagery and illustrations because they were an inspiration for me to try to imagine Whisperwood and imagine what her rendering of Whisperwood would be. So that's who Pauline Baynes is. And she's a really fascinating person to dive down a rabbit hole, which is an author's favorite thing to do to avoid actual writing. Rabbit holes are the best.
They really are. And I mean, you got to go down many, and especially in that follow-up trip, once you said, you had turned in the manuscript and we were making the arcs. And so much of that trip too also ended up in an amazing book club kit. So people need to check that out on Patti's site. What would you say, Jackie asked this, what was the most interesting part of your research?
Hi, Jackie. The most interesting part of my research, I think, was the first person accounts of Operation Pied Piper. Reading, for example, when I interviewed the woman, her name was Jan Pennell. I ended up writing a short story that was inspired by her, that is in my book club kit. But she could tell me everything about that time. She was sent away with her brother, then separated from her brother. They lived above a pub called the Live and Let Live. I am not making that up. And she remembered everything. So then she told me about how she was finally reunited with her mom, her brother, and her two little sisters, and they moved to Penzance to be safe from the war. And I said, well, when you were finally reunited, did you talk about it with your brother and your mother? Talk about the bad families you got. Talk about some of your scarier. She looked straight at me, 94, sharp as a tack, and said, never. We never talked about it. It was over, and the war was over, and it was time to move on. And that was the most fascinating part to me, was how these stories still live inside these evacuees. If you read their first person accounts or listen to them on audio, they probably have never talked about it until then, but they can tell you what they felt, what train they were on, what it felt like to carry a gas mask on their way to a stranger's to be billeted. And you hear all of that, and they've kept that inside all of these years. So the actual accounts of the children during Operation Pied Piper, it wasn't that I wasn't interested in the adults or the hard decisions the mothers had to make, but I really was interested in what it felt like for the children and how it affected them as adults now and in their future.
Yeah,
that's beautiful. And to delve a little bit more into the some of the plot in the book, I love this question from Marlene, or Marlene, I'm not sure. But we spend time with Hazel as an adult in the 1960s, and Marlene asks, would you describe the way that Hazel blames herself as a form of survivor's guilt? I think that's very interesting.
Yes, I read a lot about survivor's guilt, and I had even dove into that a little bit in my novel Surviving Savannah, which is about this idea that if other people, if you survived and someone else didn't, it is definitely your fault, right? It isn't, and especially because Hazel believes that Flora Lee disappeared looking for the land that she made up. So instead of telling you, I tried to show you how it has affected Hazel's life from that moment forward. We meet her in 1960 working in the back of a bookshop. She is still dating, a serial kind of dating. She is thinks finally she's going to settle down. She thinks she has her dream job, and she's stopped trying to think about those days, but they live inside of her. So I wanted to show how hiding those things, as the book that's called, what is the book on trauma called about, it lives inside our body. Our body keeps the
body
score.
keeps the
Body
score.
keeps, yeah, the body keeps
Our
score.
body keeps the score. And I read that, and I just knew I wanted to show that her body was keeping the score. And she had a choice when she found those papers and that first edition fairy tale. She could either chalk it up to coincidence or believing someone else heard them whisper the story, or she could turn her life upside down and take the chance and go find out and maybe face the shame of it truly being her fault instead of wondering. So that's how I tried to show. But I'm glad you noticed that, because it was important to me, Marlene, that I dive into that and show that because she didn't talk about it, it still lived in her.
Pivoting a little, but Kim had a great question, and I have to agree. I think you're such an amazing writer with such a sense of place, and that you just get absorbed and transported in this novel. And I'm sure everyone, if you haven't read it, you really will. So you need to get on it, your beach read, your book club, everything this summer. Kim asks, I love the magical settings you create. What helps you create those wonderful settings?
Oh, wow. I think, number one, delving into nature. I think that magical, and you know what? I've been on the road for a month and nobody has asked me that. So Kim, that is a fantastic question, because I love talking about this. So when I am in the British countryside, when I am in Binsey or Oxfordshire or anywhere, or in my own backyard in the middle of spring, it is so inspiring. And you in the mountains, oh my goodness, when fall is turning to gold, or South Carolina on the marshes when the sun is setting, if you don't feel like there's a liminal world between the seen and the unseen, at that moment, stop, take a breath, pay attention. And I wanted the setting, the real life setting, to feel as magical as Whisperwood. But if you're asking about how I created Whisperwood, I just turned 12 years old again. And where I could imagine that I could find a hollowed out tree and find another world, and a world where I belonged. Because who feels like they belong in the world they belong in when they're 12? No one. So, right. So, it's not hard to tap into that idea of disappearing. And those were some of my favorite scenes to write. But I think you tap into something, Kim, that I struggled with when I was writing the book, was whether to actually write a book inside a book, which I decided not to do. So you hear about the book. You hear about Whisperwood when they talk between the two of them. You enter the magical land of Whisperwood and see the talking trees and the castle and meet the queen briefly. But I don't write the book inside the book. And the reason I decided not to ultimately wasn't because I didn't want to, but because I thought it would take away from the mystery of what happened to Flora Lee.
I love that. I think we have time for one more audience question. This is a great one from Terry.
That went so fast.
I know this flew by. I'm also curious about this. Terry says, is Patti working on her next book yet? I love all of her books.
Oh, I'm sure Terry's interested, and you, Dana, and Libby, and Lindsay are.
It's $1 million question.
Oh my gosh. Does anybody have another one? No, I'm kidding. I am working on another one, and I had a bulk of it done before I left for tour, and I dove back. I thought I would take a week off, but I was so excited to get back to it that I started right back in on it yesterday when I got off the road. So
Oh my
it's
gosh.
difficult to explain. I can tell you that there is another mystery. There is, that's all I'm going to tell you. There is a little bit more English countryside, but that's all I can say at the moment. But yes, I'm working away.
Well, I think I can speak for everyone and say we're really excited about that one. And I can't wait to dip in. I'll definitely be asking for an early copy when they become available. So please put me on the list, Dana and Carlin. I just wanted to jump in and thank you guys so much for an incredible discussion. I also wanted to thank you all so much for the amazing questions on the Facebook and YouTube Live. They've been incredible to discuss and listen to. And before we go, I just want to give one last reminder that you can still post a question in the comment section to be entered to win a galley of The Paris Daughter by Kristen Harmel, who actually happens to be one of Patti's co-founders of Friends in Fiction. You can keep up with Patti by following her on Instagram and Facebook or checking out Friends in Fiction. Our next book club favorites read will be Lady Tan's Circle of Women by Lisa C. And you can join our Facebook.
I cannot wait to read that.
It's incredible. It's so beautiful. I love it.
I'm such a Lisa C fan. I can't wait to read it. Yeah.
You'll have to come and visit us at our next discussion.
I will.
You can find any updates about that actually on our Facebook and Instagram pages. And finally, guys, Patti, Carla, and Dana, I just want to thank you all so much for an incredible discussion and thank you for your time. And I hope everyone has an awesome afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks,
that was so much fun and flew by. Bye, y'all.